So I told my last class I would save a little bit of time, and it ended up being a very little bit of time. At the end of class, if you guys have thoughts, questions, or observations about either Vonnegut or paper 2. So if you have any of those right now, jot them down. If you think of any as we go, jot them down. Good rule of thumb, if you have any thoughts whatsoever that are about this class and potentially interesting, jot them down. Because you guys don't. I know you don't. And you're like, I'll think of it later. And then you don't. Jot it down. Help yourself out, man. You know? When people talk about taking notes, those lame people that take notes, that's what they're doing. They're writing down their thoughts. So they don't forget. Right? Okay. What we're going to do with most of class, we're going to talk about revisions. I've graded your first papers. Most of you are aware of that. If you're not, you should go look at Turnitin. I left you some feedback. Quick note on that. I graded a significant number of your papers while on an exercise bike.
That's what I heard.
Yeah.
I know. Nothing can be done about that, all right? If I'm going to try to stay in shape with the life I have, that's how I had to do it. I'm sorry. It's ridiculous. But anyway, that's what that is. And yeah, we tried to find a way to get some oil in there. But all that to be said, if you choose to revise the first paper, you don't have to. I'll make it optional. That's going to be due October 10th, right? So we have some time. It's not next Saturday, it's the Saturday after that. But the reason for this is we also still have to finish reading this book. We're going to keep working on the paper. We're going to start working on the paper, right? That's coming due. So you're going to have to look ahead to your schedule, and I know you have other classes and lives too. You have to look ahead to that stuff. If you decide you want to revise, and I think we all should, you're going to have to figure out where you're going to do that, okay? You have until the 10th, but I don't think you should wait until the 10th, right? So you got to sort that out. So what we're doing today, I sent you an email this morning, it was a little after 9 o'clock. The subject is the date and student example. If you would go ahead and pull that up on any device, I don't care, it's up to you. I sent you 2 documents, they're both the same. One's a Word doc, one's a PDF. That's simply because I was hoping one would work with something you have, laptop, phone, whatever you want. Now while you guys are doing that, a couple notes. This is student work. And as always, we want to be respectful, right, of our classmates' work. Why I pulled it. I think they do some things well, and obviously we can talk about those. Those are good sort of learning opportunities, okay? But I also think that the things they didn't do well are hurdles pretty much all of you ran into face first, okay? So we're going to talk a lot about those. So in other words, this may not be your paper, but I promise you, issues we highlight in this paper are also issues you have in your paper, okay? That's what we're doing today. Talked for a while. Hopefully you had time to pull it up. What we're looking at, we have 2 paragraphs. I single-spaced them just so they're easier for you to look at, again, on whatever device you might have. It's an introduction and a body paragraph. What I want to do first, we're going to look at each paragraph in turn, okay? So we're going to start with the introduction. If you guys could humor me, what are the parts of an introduction? Hook, which is optional, but you guys love them. Yeah? What was it? Thesis, very good. Gotta have those. Okay. What else? 2 more. Roadmap, very good. This is where you explain not just how the thesis works, but also, you know, how the paper works, right? Good. Last thing.
A background to like what you're talking about, I guess. I forgot the word.
Introduce text.
Yeah.
Good. And everybody, I think, unless I'm forgetting, did that this time. I usually have 1 or 2 that don't, and it does not go well. But you all introduced the text, so very good. All right. I just want you to do two things. And you can read it up here, but again, you probably read it better on your device. In this introduction, step one, do we have these parts? Can you identify where they are? Maybe make some notes about that, right? Step two, of the parts that we have, how are they working? Could they be improved in any way? Are they missing anything that we're supposed to have? Right? Anything like that. So just do those two things. Take a couple minutes. So the first question, I'm hoping, wasn't too difficult. Where are the parts? For instance, do we have a hook? Yeah. Where at?
Right in front.
Right up top, first sentence. About where does it end, do you think? Right here? You don't seem sure. Why not?
It all goes along with
Yeah. Well, one good way to think about this is our hook has to stop where what starts.
The introductory text.
Good. So where's that?
Fairchild's poem, Little Boy Illustrates.
Yeah. So this sentence, right? Okay. It's probably about like that. Okay. Let's keep breaking it up. Where does our roadmap start, do you think?
I think after perspective.
Right here? What do you guys think? Everybody agree with them? Disagree? Want to fight?
I would say that it started at
Like-
where it says Fairchild's poem, Little Boy. It's like the, I guess, 2 sentences after that.
Oh. Why do you say that?
Because I feel like it just really just described it for me.
I don't know what that means, to be honest with you.
Well, I can't really describe what I'm thinking. I'm terrible at that.
That's what this whole class is, so that's a bummer. But that's okay, that's okay. All right, well, here's what we can do. We can do it here, and we can say either this sentence or the next one. We'll allow for some conjecture at the moment. But our roadmap kind of starts in there somewhere, okay? We'll deal with that in the thesis in a minute. First, the hook. What do you guys think of it? Do you have thoughts on the hook?
Kind of long.
Kind of long. Why do you say that?
It's just, I don't know. It like, when I was reading it, I like started skipping through it because I'm like, dude, can you get to the point? Like,
Okay.
I felt like it was just too much to read to get to what the paper was about.
Good. And another thing to keep in mind, you can have longer hooks depending on what they are and how they work, but especially with what they're trying to do here is essentially they're trying to get to a rhetorical question. We can do that quicker. And also, when you look at the copy you have in front of you, think about how long this hook is compared to the rest of the introduction. You know what I'm saying? It's about 25% of the introduction, give or take. That's a lot. In a 3-page paper, you do not have a lot of space. You got to make arguments. You got to make points. And we're taking up 25% of the intro with our hook, with an optional thing. Could be a little long, okay? So how do we trim it? There's different ways to do that. Number one, I've said it a couple times, this is a rhetorical question, right? That's one of the hooks you can use. You guys like them? Okay. How does a rhetorical question work? Does anybody know?
It doesn't require an answer.
It doesn't require an answer. So, don't answer, right? Now, if you feel like the answer, rather the question you've raised requires an answer, then you probably don't have a rhetorical question. You might just want to rephrase the whole thing, right? But either way, if you're going to raise a question like this at the top of your paper, you're trying to give us a rhetorical question, don't answer it, right? You want your reader to think, absolutely not, basically. That's the point you're trying to make. Secondly, we have 3 sentences here, right? Could we lose any of them? I think we could at least lose one.
I guess where it says from what time you wake up to close your way to the Fuji to things.
You say that one?
Yeah.
Why?
I feel like that's just filler.
Well, because that list, right?
Yeah.
We could potentially trim the list a little bit.
I think you could lose the first sentence, because the next one just summarizes.
It's the same thing. Good. And again, you guys will do this all the time, not just in your hook, okay? That's part of the reason why I'm spending so much time on this. You guys will have an idea or a thought or whatever, and you'll say it. And then your brain will go, I can do that better. And you'll say it again. Oftentimes better. But the problem is, you're just saying the same damn thing, right? Okay. Yeah. Cut this guy. Now, potentially, if you want to trim that list, that's kind of up to you. They are doing that long list, I think, for a reason. Fine, but either way, this is much cleaner, right? And importantly, we're getting to what we're supposed to be talking about quicker, which is the text. Fairchild, little boy, okay. What else is an introduction of a text supposed to do? There's one other thing. Title, author, and what?
Like a small summary on what the book is about.
Good. And it doesn't have to encapsulate the entire poem. Oftentimes we can't do that, right?
Is that the road now?
No, we're saying when you introduce the text, give us a little bit of summary. Give us a little bit, right? But we need, basically, when we say summary of the text, important information. Stuff we're going to need to know about your text to understand whatever you're saying about it, right? And we kind of do that, right? Something about experience as you get older, you acquire knowledge, yields an alternate perspective to what? What do they mean when they say that last part?
Would it be like, yeah, like, be a way that goes against the way that they think right now?
Yes. So where do they tell us how they think right now?
They believe that they have control of their life.
Okay. So their kind of summary of the poem is, as you age, you learn, and maybe you don't have the control you thought you had. That's not a bad summary of the poem, right? Of a specific aspect of the poem. Cool. Okay. So that means everything we have after that is our roadmap and our thesis. Now again, to begin with, where would you guys ballpark our thesis? Where do you think our thesis starts? At the top?
Like, oh, bro, I thought that was the
Wait, I'm looking for an although. Oh, you mean in the...
thesis. You already spelled it.
Yeah, that's what I think the thesis was.
Oh, just because that language?
And it kind of deals with the thesis.
Sort of. I mean, that's the start to an argument, right? But that's also, I mean, pretty blatantly what the poem says, right? So I guess one thing you could say about that is, yes, it's the start to an argument, but you hope it's not the end, right? Okay. Do we have anything else in this block of text that feels like a thesis for one reason or another?
I didn't really think of any of it as a thesis. I feel like there was never like a statement. I feel like they're just like talking, they're just breaking down the poem rather than saying like, I believe this.
Well, they don't have to say "I believe," right? I would rather you didn't be, but I take your point.
Yeah.
They do make one. I'm gonna say they at least make one. And we're gonna talk about it, but I like where your head's at. Where do we hope the thesis is? Let's do it that way.
The last sentence.
Usually, in a paper like this, it's gonna be this guy, right? Okay. And the spacing is weird because this is a PDF that this came from. Okay. We'll talk about that in a minute. Let's talk about the roadmap. You guys seem to take issue with some of it. Oh, don't do that, sweetie. Sorry. All right. So you guys are saying a lot of the roadmap, you're not sure we're making claims. Why? What leads you to that conclusion? What makes you say that?
I guess the way it was worded, it just seems like there aren't really any claims. He's just kind of breaking down the story.
A lot of it is summary, right? And again, we talked about this when we talked about the roadmap. You can summarize little parts of the poem. You oftentimes should. These are the parts of the poem you're interested in. But again, you gotta tell us why those parts matter, how they help support your argument, whatever it is, right? And I agree, we're not doing much of that, okay? Well, what about that first sentence? That sounds super fancy. That's a big word, hold on. Help me out real quick, and I have a reason, I'm not just being weird. Somebody talk to me about this first sentence. What is that? What are we saying? Doesn't that kind of sound like an argument? It's got something going on, right? All right, let's break it down. We can do this in two halves. To begin with, we have our little list. This almost feels like the 3 prongs most of you were probably taught to do, right? Translate makes use of for me. What does that mean? Fairchild uses. That's all that means, right? Now, why do I make that point? Most of you were lied to in grade school. You were taught that you can dress up your observations, your summaries with fancy language. No one talks like this. I don't even talk like this. Apparently I talk like I'm 50. I don't even talk like this, right? No one says that. Makes use of, come on. But it's a way to dress up a simpler, you're just saying Fairchild does this. That's all you're saying, right?
So you don't want us to do that?
No, you can. My point is, you're tricking yourselves into thinking you're making arguments when you're not. Okay? So you can make an argument with this language. But just because you have this language does not mean you have an argument. Fairchild makes use of symbols. Okay, so in a poem, we're going to have symbols. That's every poem, okay? Comparisons. We're going to compare things to each other. That's every poem. And tense shifts. That's just about every poem. I'm not in love with the list because that's how literature works. Again, I think that you guys will trick yourselves into thinking, well, if I just talk about 3 literary techniques, I'm heading in a good direction. I mean, unless you're going to tell me what these things do, how they support an argument, again, no, I don't care. I don't care if you cite literary techniques. I'm thrilled if you do when you make an argument, but I'm just thrilled when you make an argument. And I say all this because what we're basically saying is Fairchild is going to use these things. You're promising me, as a reader, you're going to talk about these 3 things. We do not talk about these 3 things in the introduction. We don't. So that's a problem. But number 2, you're also promising me when you set it up like this, he uses these to do what? That what is your argument? In order to convey the aforementioned concept. Sounds very fancy. How often do you guys say aforementioned?
Like mentioned beforehand.
Exactly. I was about to say, some of you don't even know what that means. Aforementioned, yeah, like you're basically saying that thing I just said, that. That's what aforementioned means. So they're directing us up here to that thing that you guys, in a way, rightfully pointed out was kind of a thesis, kind of argumentative. But again, this is their aforementioned concept, and we translated it already. What are we saying? We're saying our argument is what?
Mentioned before.
Yes, but what is it?
Oh.
Might change as you get older, I guess.
As you get older, you learn things, and one of those things you learn is that you don't have the control you think you do. Basically what you're saying. Which is true, I think, in the poem. But I also think the speaker tells us pretty explicitly. Does anyone remember the last line of this poem?
You could do nothing and neither could I.
Yeah.
That sounds like lack of control to me, right? Rather explicitly. So that's what I mean when I say that can be the start to an argument, but it cannot be the end. It cannot be where we stop, right? And I think that's why we don't have much, if any, of an argument in the roadmap, because we have nothing to prove. Because after you read Little Boy, and maybe you talk about it with, say, a guy like me for a minute, and somebody gave you this, would it require much convincing, this idea? No, not really. That's going to show up on the page. Half the time you feel like you have nothing to say, it's because you're trying to support a banal claim. You don't have anything to say. So that's our problem here. Now, one thing that could save it, you're like, come on, thesis. What do we have? We have some more fancy language, makes it apparent. You guys don't really say that. And that's okay. Again, at no point am I telling you not to sound a little bit fancy. I'm cool with that. This person is using it correctly, first of all, which not everybody does, so like, cool, okay. He makes it apparent through tonal shift, which we've still yet to talk about, verbal tense shift. You could probably just do tense shift, but we haven't talked about that either. So you're telling me that the rest of this is going to be our argument. Can you guys translate the second half of this sentence for me? What are we saying? This is going to be our argument for the whole paper when it comes to this poem. And so he gets older and he learns things. That's our argument.
That's a hard argument to like hold up, like for 3 pages. I feel like that will die out.
You know that before the poem, before you ever encounter the poem.
Right.
You're telling me you're gonna argue to me that people get older and learn shit? Exactly. Exactly. It's banal. It's not worth proving. Right? That's why we don't in the introduction. It does not require proof. And so at no point is your brain like, I gotta worry about this. No. No. So this is where our argument starts. It's not where it ends. Right? And that's a problem in this paper. To understand that better though, we're gonna talk about the body paragraph. And this, by the way, is too big to have on the screen. I mean, we'll look at parts of it, but I can't show you all of it. So again, you probably wanna look at it on your device there. Before we do that, humor me one more time. Parts of a body paragraph. Anybody remember? We got 3 of them, 3 parts.
Identify.
Oh no, okay. When I hear you reading, that tells me you guys don't know, which breaks my heart. Okay. Do you know what identify pertains to? What part of the? Oh, okay. You don't sound sure. That also hurts. That's okay. Topic sentence. What else?
Illustrate.
Uh-huh.
Like the evidence.
Uh-huh.
Explain the evidence.
Good. You perform analysis or interpretation or explanation, or however you want to talk about it. Yeah. How's the topic sentence supposed to work? Supposed to do 2
You
things.
know what you're talking about for the rest of the body paragraph?
Main idea for the body paragraph. Good. And ideally, that main idea should be what?
One of the arguments from the introduction, or like part of the roadmap for the introduction.
Dude, at this point, I'll just take argument. I mean, ideally, it'll be in your, but yeah, get argument. Needs to be an argument, needs to be the main idea of your paragraph. Topic sentence. Good. Evidence. What's that?
What your arguments, right?
What you're pointing to from the text. Oftentimes, it's a quotation when we're using written texts, okay? But it's some specific element from the text. I'm going to point to this to make my argument. And that means, of course, that the last guy, analysis,
Is that how it relates to your argument?
how you're using that evidence to make your argument. And we're going to really harp on using evidence today, because not a lot of us did that. All right, so again, just like we did a couple minutes ago, with these 3 parts in mind, I first want you to try to find those 3 parts in the body paragraph. And then, how are those 3 parts working? Are we missing anything? Can we add to this? Can we make it better in some way? Take a couple minutes. We'll talk about it. All right. To begin with, topic sentence. Do we have one? Or do we at least have an attempt at one? Sure. Where at?
First thing.
First sentence. Fairchild opens his poem with comforting imagery, setting the scene on a post-World War II America. Are there any issues with that topic sentence?
Because it doesn't say like, how,
Say it with your chest, but I can't hear
it doesn't say like how,
you. Good. Good. You down yourself too much, man. That was excellent. What does she mean when she says there's no how? What is that? What are we getting at?
they don't go any further than that, that's all they can mention about the setting.
I couldn't hear you at all. I'm so sorry.
They don't like mention anything else about the setting or the imagery.
Okay, so first of all, I think what you're saying, in the rest of the body paragraph, yeah, it turns out maybe that's not what we're going to talk about. You guys do that a lot. You think you're going to talk about something. You do. That's how drafting works. Fine, I don't know, and I'll do this. But then you start writing, and your brain gets going. And you do something else. Okay? Look, we got to go change that, don't we? Yeah. Problem number one, it's not the main idea of our body paragraph, as it turns out. I would argue, hint, bigger problem. And this gets back to your thing. Bigger problem in the first sentence. We don't have a how or a why. We don't have an argument. Fairchild opens the poem with imagery. Yeah, he does. Sets the scene. That's our scene. Yeah, this is summary, right? Now, again, when you're drafting, a lot of times you start with summary because you don't know what your argument is. And if you end up talking about this stuff, and hopefully you make some kind of an argument, great. And that means you got to get that up to the top of the paragraph, right? Because it's not there right now. We don't have an argument. And as it turns out, as you pointed out as well, we don't even talk about that stuff. We don't talk about any of it. All right, so we need a topic sentence. We thought we were doing that. As it turns out, we're not. It's all good. Do we have evidence? Yes. And this is good, because not every time do you guys have evidence, which troubles me. You need evidence. You need specific evidence. Gotta have it. Otherwise, what are we doing, right? How many quotations do we have? Anybody count them?
One,
We got more than one.
maybe two.
I feel like we're playing Price is Right. We got more than two.
1, 2, 3.
3. We got 3. Our first one is right up top. Oh, I'm going to do our thing real quick. Don't do the ellipsis. Whoever taught some of you to do that is a very dumb person. I don't think they should have a job. I'm being real with you right now. I don't think they should be allowed to talk to you about whatever they talk to you about when they taught you that. I think they're fools. That's not a thing. That's not a thing. Somebody told you to do that, they're a dumb person. So everything they told you, throw it out. All right. I don't know if that's true. That might be a bit strong, but. Okay. So we have this first quotation. Where does our second quotation come up? Then you got to scroll a little bit, right? It's like.
Asking my father.
Yeah, I think what they wanted to do, to be honest with you, they meant that to be their lead-in because they don't have one of that quotation. All right, so that's our second quotation. Where's the third one?
At the end. So we tap
Ah, right here, right here. All right. So this is our 3 quotations. Do you notice a profound difference between our 3 quotations?
There isn't much explanation as it goes on.
Yeah, we have a whole lot to say about the first one. And I got thoughts about that. But the last 2, you know, there's not much there. And I'm not saying you always have to say this much about every quotation. Although I'd love it if you did. But you don't have to, necessarily, okay? Sure. But it should strike you as kind of odd if you take a step back from your own work and you say, man, I had some real thoughts on this one, right? And I'm looking at these and I'm like, especially that last one? Why do we have that last one? Do we say anything about it? What did we accomplish with that last quotation? Real quick. It's like, it's all one sentence, right? What are we saying? Translate it for us.
I guess his reaction when he got mad.
And we're saying it further proves the thing I just said, right? If that's all you're doing with a quotation especially, there's something else you can do. You don't always have to quote. What else can you do?
Just explain what happened.
There's a fancy word, it starts with a P.
Paraphrase.
Paraphrase, very good. If you do that, because oftentimes you can do it quicker. The father's hand, slowly taps the arm throughout the rest of the poem to show how upset he is, whatever, right? Paraphrase that. You don't need the quotation. You quote for language. The reason you pull quotations in your papers is because you want to show the reader language. How a thing is said is important. That's what you say to the reader when you quote something. But if you're just quoting for story, for plot, well, you don't need to quote. It's a paraphrase. You say it, right? The other thing I want to point out to you, both of these quotations come toward the end of the paragraph, right? One reason for that is, again, we start with a quotation and we had a whole lot to say about it, which is great. But because of that, you all have a shot clock in your head about how long a paragraph should be, give or take. And once you get to the end of that shot clock, it does not matter what you were saying, you were done with that paragraph. You all do that. This student said all that, and they're like, man, I need something else, I don't know, talk about this thing. But that quotation, they move through very quickly, don't say a lot. They bring up that last quotation, this shot clock is going off, man, they are done with this paragraph. So they don't talk about that quotation at all. There's two things that can happen here. Number one, and this one has to happen, we probably don't need these quotations in this paragraph. At best, maybe we use this one if we want to tie it in somehow with the above point we're making, because right now it's making a different point, okay? Second thing we can do, potentially, maybe we have another idea. Maybe this is its own paragraph, right? Potentially. If we have more to say about these quotations, it needs to be its own paragraph. If we don't, then maybe we didn't have anything to say about these. That's fine too. You lose that stuff, okay? No big thing. We're not losing a lot, right? We're going to come back to these in a second. What I want to talk about is this behemoth. We say a whole lot about that line, right? Oh, and by the way, you need citations as well. They forgot citations. I don't know why. Actually, I have theories, but that's not important. Does anybody, why do you guys think they have so much to say about this one line? How do they do that? Do you have any ideas?
I guess repeating.
Kind of. To their credit, they have one point, but they are making they're making different smaller points to do with that point.
I guess because it's explaining the thing,
Say what now?
it's talking about the thing, right? That's what we have to
I don't
say.
know what that means.
So it says the biggest underlying thing.
Oh, theme. I thought you said things, and I was like, what things? Yeah. And they meant that to be a colon as well. Here's how they do this, okay? Now, before we dive into this, I'm going to admit that some of this feels like a little bit of a stretch. You don't know what that means?
No, I didn't.
I don't know what you're saying. When I say it's a stretch, what I mean is I'm not entirely convinced of this, basically circle of life stuff, now that we all probably have that song in our heads. I'm willing to buy it, I guess, especially because they get so much mileage out of it. But it's a little, I'm like, okay, But how they get so much mileage out of it is by digging into details. What are we talking about? We're talking about this like cyclical nature of life, this bicyclical nature of life. I know, it's an awful joke, I love it. The way we do that, the way we do all of this, is we had a thought, and we're like, you know what? Wheels spin. And in that line, they are talking about the fact that this wheel is spinning. What else spins? What's a bicycle? Cycles. Cycle of life. What is a cycle?
Something that keeps going in
Yeah.
rotation, I guess.
Yeah. So like fall just started, right? And soon it'll be winter, and then spring, and then summer, and then fall again. That's how cycles work. Okay. So we're talking about in terms of the lives of these characters. Sure. I'm willing to go with you on that, I think. But again, it kind of matters where we end up. So where do we end up? We're saying a whole lot about, we're saying one thing about the boy and then one thing about the father. What are we saying about these characters? Yeah. His wheel will one day stop. It's like coming to a stop, right? They say. And then the boy, on the other hand, is doing what? Yeah, he's just kind of getting going, right? On his cycle, I suppose. What kind of an argument is that? I've said it several times today. Starts with a B.
Banal.
Banal. You're going to tell me that the father's going to die and that the son is going to get older. And that's going to be your argument. I don't need to read the poem to know that. And I definitely don't need you to explain to me those two things. And if I'm just now explaining to you that you're going to one day die, I'm really sorry to break it to you. But that is how it works. At least with current medical technology. I mean, who knows years from now. But, again, two things. Number one, they get a lot of mileage out of those circling spokes, okay? They do that by digging into details. They picked up on one element from that line. They do not talk to me about the story around that line. They don't even talk to me about most of the line. They pick up on the detail that those circles, those spokes spin. And it comes very early in the poem, so you could argue that it's in some way meant to be symbolic in a way. Okay, fine. And they're off and running from that point, right? That's all excellent. If you, late at night, say the night a paper is due. I know you guys don't do this, but say that you do. Really only start writing the night a paper is due. And you're like, I don't know what to do. Dig into details. That's why you pull quotations. So you can say, all right, this whole line, now that you see it in front of you, I'm going to talk about this part. And maybe this part, right? Focus on details. That's how you do this. The second thing, we end up in a banal place. You guys, oftentimes, your very first reading is going to be banal or summary. It just is. It's your first reading. It's your first attempt. How often do you do a thing well the very first time? Not often. Same thing here. Okay. What I'm saying is, I don't think we have to throw all of this out. I think we keep most of it. I just think we kind of tried to tie a neat bow on the end that was available, that was ready in the front of our heads. Okay, cycle of life, circle of life, how does that work? Okay, people die, they get older, and then they die. Cool, done. No, because that was the first thought you had. That's the first thought I'm going to have. It's the first thought you're going to have, because that's how that shit works. That's how banal claims work. Now then, we're missing an element of how cycles work. That's apparently what we want to talk about, okay? Not just the cycle of life, okay, which is what they name up here, the cyclical nature of life, but cycles in general. That's what we're talking about. How do cycles work? Again, we're in a lot of them right now, but the one we mentioned, fall just started, then winter, then summer, then spring. Wait, I fucked that up. I'm very sick. But you get it. And then fall's gonna come back around, right? How do cycles work in the way that we're talking about? You're gonna get older and die, and the people that are young now, they're gonna do the same thing. And that's just gonna keep happening. We're missing an important element of cycles here.
So would life not be a cycle then because it stops?
Well, it stops for you, but according to them, that's the part of the cycle. Or again, if it helps, the circle of life, right? That whole thing with Mufasa. Lions eat the antelopes or whatever, but then the lions die and they become the grass and they feed the antelopes, and I tear up because I'm thinking about my sons, right? That's how that movie goes for me. What are cycles? How do they work? Any cycle, pick one, I don't care. How do they work? It's a repetitive process. Into perpetuity, perhaps. You guys don't know what that means. That means it goes on basically forever. It doesn't stop. If you have a cycle that repeats and doesn't stop, then what are we saying about that cycle? Insofar as you're concerned. If you're a part of that cycle, what happened? I feel like somebody said something in that direction.
You don't like have control.
You don't have control of it.
Stuck in
Doesn't that sound a little bit like something we were talking about in the introduction? It does. Damn it. Yeah. So instead of people are going to get older and die, because it's like, we know that. People are going to do that, and they're always going to do that, because it's inescapable. You don't have control over that aspect of your life. And again, I know that could seem banal, because in some ways it is. But we're tying it back to our introduction, to this conversation about control over you and your life, the decisions you can make. Very first paragraph, you can make the claim that, like, how much control do you really have in this poem, in this world with these characters, if at the end of all of it, there's going to be an end. And you have no say in that, right? Sure. At the very least, that would tie into the larger conversation I think they're trying to have, okay? And it's a little less banal. It's a little more interesting. I think maybe that's what they're trying to do. Okay. Last thing. I said before, we have these two quotations. I don't think they necessarily tie into that first one, okay? And we can lose them if we want. But I think right now, let's see what we can do. We might be able to do more with these, right? We already said too, we don't say anything about that. To be totally fair, I'm really good at this. I don't know what you could say about that. He does tap it slowly. It is a chair. You know what I'm saying? Like that's hard. I'm not in love with that quotation. But this one, we say some things, okay? What do we start with? What points do we begin to make about this quotation? We make some points. Make about 2 of them.
He has no grasp on the subject.
You gotta say it with your chest, dog.
He has no grasp on the subject.
Okay. And again, that's a little bit fancy, but basically saying he has no fucking idea what he's talking about. Right? Okay. Good. That's a start to a point now. Much of what we talked about when we talked about Little Boy, we talked about innocence, lack of knowledge, being ignorant. Okay? Seems like they're trying to talk about that. Okay, that's one. What's the other point they start to make? This is something that may not require much proof right now, but you would have to explain it a little bit. They say something about this boy. They make a claim about this boy.
I don't even know what that word means.
What is it?
Tactless?
Tactless.
Yeah.
Good. When you say, often we use it in a negative, someone has no tact. Does anybody know what that means? Okay. You're basically saying they're impolite, or they don't. I'll put it to you this way: my 5-year-old is tactless. Primarily, most of the time, I don't even try to have a conversation with my wife when my kids are around. Like today, I'll go home when I'm done teaching. My wife will ask, "Hey, how was your day?" It's a tactful thing to do, right? And I'll start to explain it. Well, my throat is on fire because it is right now. You have no idea. This hurts. And I'll start talking about it, and then my 5-year-old will be like, "Hey, Mom, what about and he'll just fucking did nothing, right? He'll just start screaming. He has no tact. We understand by this point that maybe you don't do that, right? When someone is speaking, maybe you let them, especially if two people are having a conversation. You don't just jump in and like kick the door down on the conversation, right? It's impolite. It's lacking in tact. So that's what we're talking about here. Which is interesting, right? Because basically what we're doing, we're getting that innocence here, right, in this first sentence. Lack of knowledge, like we talked about. But then we define it further. There's all kinds of knowledge you lack when you're small. You don't know basically anything. But we can't talk about that. That's huge, to know nothing, right? Maybe one thing they're interested in, one thing the boy doesn't know. They call it tact, but it might help if we use another term too, because some of you aren't familiar with that. What are they lacking in? Like when the boy asked that question, or when my son just kamikazes every fucking conversation I try to have.
Is it discipline? Or is it not discipline?
Well, so I'll put it to you this way. You guys know not to do that, right?
Like common sense.
Well, it is, but it is learned, right? That's kind of the point we're making here. What have you learned? What tells you not to do that? It's not just common sense. Because the way we use that phrase is almost like everybody knows that. It's like, you don't, though. You've learned something. What have you learned?
What we're trying to get is like immaturity.
Hmm?
Like immaturity.
Well, again, it gets lumped into lack of maturity because it's a part of that inexperience. But we're talking about it like knowledge. So this is a lesson you've learned. What have you learned? What are you maybe adhering to that tells you not to do those things?
Manners.
Like how people react to it.
Well, that too. Okay. So both of those. Ugh. Sorry. For instance, this is probably considered ill-mannered, but I would die otherwise. Yeah, so we're talking about manners, for instance, is an interesting word. It's very common usage, just like common sense. We're talking about, we have rules. A fancier term you'll hear, I'll just give it to you for fun. Can't really see it back there. It looks like the plural form of more. Social mores, you'll hear tossed around. They mean rules. We have rules. You don't do what my 5-year-old does once you're about 7 or 8, right? We allow it for little kids because they haven't learned yet. If you have a friend who does that sort of thing, you're not friends with them for very long. It's like, dude, you don't have any manners. It's like, where did you grow up? How do you not know this, right? We all expect a certain foundation because you learn that stuff over time. But we're saying one thing the boy does not know is that he should not ask his father this question, right? He hasn't learned it yet. He doesn't have that tact. He doesn't know those rules, whatever. Okay. I just want a little menu here real quick. What are some other things we could say the boy does not know given this question, given this line? Asking my father as mindlessly as I would ask if he ever saw DiMaggio or Mantle, why we dropped the bomb on those two towns in Japan. What are some things he doesn't know, he doesn't understand?
Geography, like where the Pacific is and all that.
I had that written down too, and to be fair, that's a little later because of that line. But if we're recasting this paragraph, we could potentially bring that in if we wanted to. Okay? Yeah? What else doesn't he know? There's a couple of things. There's a lot of things, but specifically. Take the big question, right? Why we dropped the bomb on those two towns in Japan.
Don't really have control, like, why we dropped the bomb, like, that's why they got mad.
I kind of followed you and then you trailed off. You almost always have a point, man. I'm not gonna grill you, but you got more going on in here than you seem to think you do. I'm just gonna leave it like that, okay? You can do it. All right.
War?
Yeah. The boy doesn't understand that. Doesn't understand how it works. You can kind of say too, war and like geopolitics, right? This big picture sort of understanding, you know, that even you guys, where you're at in your lives, right? 18, 19, 20, however old you are, you probably barely understand that shit. It's a blip on your radar, right? Now imagine you're 5. No idea. No idea. Doesn't even know it exists in that way, right? Okay. Anything else? We got a few more things. Something we don't pay attention to in this question. What's up?
Like the we where it says why did we drop the bomb? Like he doesn't understand like who actually dropped the bomb and that it wasn't like just his dad.
Okay, good, good. Yeah, so this, and I like that too, specifically, because we're using details now, right? The same way we did in that earlier quotation with the spokes, right? Focus on details. Yeah. What does we mean? And we talked about this in class. He's saying, we the people, basically, right? We, as a country, one team, we were like, yeah, bomb those fuckers. And that's cool, because like, go team. But we know, not the boy. We're with the father. We know they don't really work like that. You know, I mean, you vote every couple of years and you elect some people, and they just kind of do whatever the hell they want for the most part. It seems like we don't really. We have a say, but like, not. It's very small. It's very small most of the time. You know. Yeah, that's another thing he doesn't understand. And that seems to maybe come up here. Good. There's one other thing I want to highlight for you. And this actually gets ignored even more than that. And that's a very good detail like that. The first half. Asking my father is mindlessly. That all means he's young and dumb. We know that, okay? As I would ask if he ever saw DiMaggio or Mantle.
Those guys are kind of big and important.
They're a big deal.
He probably has.
He probably has. They're all-time famous baseball players. I don't give a damn about baseball. I know who those guys are, right? At least a little bit. I've heard of them, right? They've been dead a long time. But I've heard of them because they were really good at baseball. They were famous for it. So the son is equating the father, having seen these guys, to the father having an answer for this. That's what we're saying here. And again, the point that it's making is that that's a mindless thing to do. That's an innocent thing to do, to equate seeing these guys to having this answer, right? We're saying that those are not the same, but the boy doesn't know that. So what does the boy maybe not understand about what DiMaggio and Mantle are versus Why we drop the bombs? Why do we know who DiMaggio and Mantle? Even just a little bit.
Because they're consistently praised and talked about.
Yeah, I mean, but you hear a lot about atomic bombs. I mean, that's pretty famous, right? It's a pretty big deal.
Nobody's like, yay.
Some people are, but yeah, most people, yeah, yeah. Well, at the time the poem was written, it was about half and half, I think. History has kind of gone on and changed that, you know. But yeah, and there's always the narrative that is a real narrative. It's like, well, what would they have done, you know? Again, I can't recommend it enough. Hardcore History, excellent podcast. Talks about how the Japanese emperor abdicated his throne. They legit saw him as a god, a capital G god in their culture. He had to abdicate his throne and convince his people, like, you have to stop. Because to hear people back then tell it, they were prepared, like, everybody, let's go. Like, that would be like me telling you guys, all right, these guys are coming, get some sticks, we're gonna do this. And you're all like, yeah. And the narrative is like, well, do you fight all that, or do you just kind of like make two statements and you're like, put your shit down? So, you know, it's a hard question. And that's the point. It's a very hard question. There's no easy answer. This is an easy answer. Did you see him or didn't you? Yeah. It's silly, right? Kind of. It's fun. It's something a kid would ask. This is not. But another thing we can think about, and I brought this up in my last class. If we're thinking about cycles, and I only say that we are because we were in the previous paragraph. Another option, and these are all options. In no way am I saying you would tackle all these in a paragraph. That would be bananas. Don't do that, okay? I like read very much, for instance. That's probably why I talked about it in class when we talked about this poem. But another option is asking my father as mindlessly as I would ask if he ever saw DiMaggio or Mantle. Doesn't that imply, especially, say this poem occurs around 1950 or whatever, okay? Anywhere in that era. You ask a dude in 1950, hey man, did you ever like turn on the TV? Or even maybe somehow catch a game? Did you ever see DiMaggio or Mantle play? What's he probably gonna say? Yeah. This is back when people liked baseball, right? Yeah. It's almost a banal question, right? It doesn't need to be asked. Because they have a certain status about them. These guys are world famous, especially when the poem occurs. Okay? It's almost silly to suppose the father would not have seen them, would not have heard of them. Okay? We're talking about cycles now, though. And we're kind of asking the dad, did you ever hear about these guys? Yes, son, I heard about them. They're kind of a big deal. Because they have a certain status, right? I mean, I was going to give you an example, but I don't know what you guys know, to be honest with you. You ever heard of LeBron James? You ever seen LeBron James play? Even if you don't like basketball, you're like, yeah, he's fucking LeBron James. What are you talking about? Like, it's that level, okay, of status. Even if you don't like basketball, you know who LeBron James is. That's insane. Don't be stupid, right? Okay. But doesn't that also, especially when attached at the hip to this, and that lack of control, that lack of authority, power, doesn't that also suppose a lack of status on the part of the father? He doesn't have an answer for this because it's a very difficult question. But also because, if we're thinking about we, he points out later in the poem, no son, they, not we, they, he's not on that tier. He's not a part of that process, right? What does that have to do with cycles, though? I do have a point.
Well, when you're younger, like you think the world of your parents, but as
Yeah.
you get older, you realize they're just kind of normal people.
They're just people. Yeah. Like pretty much all of us. We're just people. Just doing our thing. Importantly, my last class took that and said, and one day you will die. No. Why can that not be our argument in this paragraph?
That's banal.
Banal as hell. Yes, good. If you leave with nothing else today, know what a banal argument is. Ending everything with, and one day we will die, is not gonna do you any favors. But, think back to how cycles work. That wasn't our main point, even in that first paragraph, that was part of our point. What's the thing with cycles and how they work? We're in fall, we're gonna have winter.
Ending, you're trapped.
You're always trapped in it. You're always a part of it. You're not going to get out of it. The sun leaves like Mantle does in Body and Soul, right? He leaves. He gets out. But how's the poem end? He can do nothing and neither can I.
So it's just the same as where his body is.
He's probably about the same sort of dude. Yeah. He has probably the same sort of knowledge his father had at that age. He sees the world the same kind of way, more or less, you know. Who is he? He's not DiMaggio or Mantle. Look, I'm going to be real with you. B.H. Fairchild is a big deal. None of you heard of him. He's a poet. In 2020, come on. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. He's not Joe DiMaggio. He's not Mickey Mantle. People will hear about him down the line. But it's going to be in classes like this for the most part. You won't think about him after this class for the most part, right? But if somebody brings these guys up in conversation, like, oh yeah, I heard of that person, blah, blah. So now we're talking about status and what access you have to what parts of the world, if we're talking about decision-making, authority, power, control, however you want to phrase it. And again, we're on this note about a cycle and how there's something there about how you can't escape it. You can't change sort of your position in life or something like that, right? You could argue. There's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot to explain there. That's why it has to have its own paragraph. You follow me? Okay. With a little bit of time we have left. I told you it wouldn't be much. Questions or observations or ideas about either, well, about Vonnegut, about the second paper, or because it's fresh, the first paper, anything.
Okay, so with the second paper,
Yes, sir.
the articles, do they have to like talk about Vonnegut, or can they like,
No.
okay.
Yeah. And actually, Grace raised this question. She said some people in SI, this is like piggybacking on yours, articles don't have to be about Vonnegut. They can be, they don't have to be.
Okay.
They need to, again, because we're not worried about what text a given article is talking about. We're worried about ideas, okay? And to piggyback on that, some people in SI apparently, you guys should go, by the way. You should go to SI. Not many people go. You get 5 points on your paper, you go to 3 sessions. Man, come on. But some people were wondering, you know, in these papers, do we only talk about masculinity? And to that I would say, well, in our classes, do we only talk about masculinity? No. We do talk about it. We can talk about it more, but I get bored too. In this book, this is a 300-page novel. There's a lot of stuff about masculinity. There's a lot of stuff about war. There's a lot of stuff about time and free will, kind of in a similar way to how we were talking about little boys just now, right? How much control do you have over yourself and your life? There's different ways to think about that. Different forces pushing people around. All kinds of ideas. The stuff you're supposed to have read for today, they even, a little bit, talk about race and issues in America, like in the 60s and 70s. There's all kinds of stuff in this book. So not just, does it not have to be about Vonnegut, but it doesn't have to be about masculinity either. It's all manner of things, okay? You had a question there.
Can you explain what the roadmap is?
Sure, very briefly. It does two things, okay? And I gotta talk about a thesis to help you understand. If your thesis is your main idea of your paper, right? And it's like a sentence or two, you know, it's not long. That's a lot of pressure on your thesis. Gotta do a lot of work very quickly. The roadmap, the reason I call it that, the two reasons. Number one, it works as a map. It explains what I'm gonna see in the thesis, but you have more room to do it. Roadmap can be 4, 5, 6, 7 sentences. You know, you have much more room to explain not just what you're gonna look at in the paper, but what you're gonna say about it in detail. So then when I get to your thesis, I understand what you're talking about. The other reason I call it a roadmap, ideally, whatever we see in that roadmap, we're also gonna see in the thesis. Means we're also gonna see it throughout the paper, right?
So it's just what we're gonna put in our body together.
Yeah. Another way to put all that, there should be no surprises in your paper. Again, it's somewhere along the line, somebody lied to you guys. A lot of you think like, well, I don't want to give it away. It's like, give it away? It's not a magic trick. It's an argument. You want me on the same page as you. I need to know what I'm going to see, what you're going to say about it. You don't have room to explain everything. And that would be crazy in an introduction. But you introduce me to your ideas. That's why we call it that, right? So then when I get to the body of your paper, I'm like, oh yeah, they mentioned, okay, I kind of know what we're talking about already. I'm prepared for whatever you're going to say to me. That's the goal. Give it away a little bit. Yeah? Other questions you guys have? Yes, ma'am.
For the annotated stuff.
Yes.
For two assignments.
Yes.
So we choose two sources of our own, and then also what we're submitting is the Vonnegut and then the other source, right?
Yes. One bib on Vonnegut, one bib on Jarvis, and then the other two on sources you find. And I am sorry I had to whisper in those videos. That's the most volume I could muster. And I know my laptop is shit and cut out at a couple points, but I still think you could follow it for the most part, the video. But yes, to your question, you have the right idea. Yes, ma'am.
Which two are first?
To the hot setup?
Which two are first?
It's up to you. Because again, I know especially at this point in the semester, we all kind of, if we don't yet, we're going to have a lot on our plate pretty soon. I'll leave it up to you. My advice would be, real talk, look ahead of your schedule. Not just in this class, other classes. Try to figure out what's going to be going on in your life in the next couple weeks. We're coming up on midterms. This is where stuff gets real. Finals is going to be the same thing, by the way, if you don't know that. But yeah, like we have a revision due on the 10th, if you want to do it. Our second paper, I think, is maybe due the week after that or so. I don't know what's going on in your other classes, but in terms of the bibs, in my estimation, it's going to take you less time to do a bib on Vonnegut and Jarvis, because you have them. We've talked about Vonnegut a ton. We're going to talk about Jarvis. You're going to have them. You don't have to go find them. So if you have a week where you have less time, I would do those two then. If you have a week, you have a little more time, you're going to have to go find articles. It's going to take a little longer. That's when I would do those two, right? But it's up to you.